Welcome, everyone, to the EA online conference. We are together today with Kim Marie and diving into the topic of parent-child chart dynamics. So thank you so much, Kim Marie, for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you at AEA, Association of Evolutionary Astrologers by Jeffrey Wolf Green, for all the work you're doing behind the scenes and putting this together and just making it a real nice pleasure for those of us who are speakers in sharing what we have to share. And I'd like to welcome all of you who are listening live and any of you who are listening in the future. Thank you very much for tuning into this talk on parent-child chart dynamics. And so what I am going to do here is I'm going to try my little pencil one more time because I do like to point out things. And then I'm going to see if I can move. I don't know if it's going to let me move my screen thing. I'll find out here. Hold on just a second for me. Okay, so let's click on that.
We can see your little pencil.
Yeah, but I'm clicking to move forward and it's not letting me move forward. So I'm going to click out of that and see. Okay, is there something I need to do to move forward, Michelle?
You will probably need to go to the bottom of the PowerPoint screen. There you go. Or use
There we
the
go.
arrow.
Got it. Got it. The arrow thing is working now. All right, everyone. First of all, one real basics to evolutionary astrology, especially if there are any of you out there who are new. In the world of EA, we look at a planet and its sign and house rulership as one archetype. So as we go through this next lecture, we look at the Moon, Cancer, 4th house as one archetype. We look at Saturn, Capricorn, and 10th house as one archetype. One of Jeffrey Green's most basic teachings is that if you just learn the 12 archetypes, Aries through Pisces, 1st through 12th house, then you can extrapolate a sign, a house, and a planet. And it really does help take some confusion out of that whole chart interpretation thing if you recognize we have 12 archetypes. Now, in regards to the parent-child dynamics, any natal chart can describe the parent-child relationship from both the parent's point of view and the child's point of view, looking at the same primary considerations. And we are going to go over those. And one thing to note is that these primary considerations that we're going to look at, they can be observed in any order. There isn't a step 1, step 2, step 3. And you'll see we're going to use 3 chart examples here. And you'll see that we just kind of go back and forth with however our intuitive ideas are coming through for us. Also, when we are looking at these primary considerations, they always must be observed and correlated. This is another basic to EA, observe and correlate. You try not to project and don't make any assumptions either. And so you must observe and correlate what is the evolutionary state of consciousness for both the parent and the child. And what are the environmental conditioning factors for both the parent and the child as well. Again, we'll have some examples we'll look at. Now, this is the slide for the whole lecture if you want to know these primary considerations. Number 1, it's Moon and Saturn by sign and house placements. This will include the phasal relationship between the Moon and Saturn, and it will also include any planetary aspects to the Moon and to Saturn, and where those planetary aspects are by their sign and house. The next consideration is, what are the signs of the zodiac on the 4th and 10th house cusps? And where are those planetary rulers by those signs where they are in their own sign house aspects. And then, are there any planets in the fourth house? Are there any planets in the 10th house? What aspects are those planets making? And then third, we do the same thing with Cancer and Capricorn. What house cusp are they on? And so where are the house planetary rulers? For example, if Cancer's on the 5th house, the house planetary ruler is the Sun. Sun rules 5th house Leo. So where are the house planetary rulers by their natal position, sign, and house, and what aspects are they making? And then, are there planets in the sign Cancer? Are there planets in the sign of Capricorn? Are they making any aspects? And so, one more time again, this is the nuts and bolts of everything when we are looking at the parent-child chart dynamics. What I would like to do next, though, is I want to just briefly have a little review of Moon and Saturn as archetypes. And again, we'll be looking at Moon, Saturn, Cancer, or excuse me, Moon, 4th house Cancer as one archetype, and Saturn, 10th house Capricorn as one archetype for us. And so, to get started here, Moon is passive polarity, cardinal modality, and it is the water element, which is our emotions. And so this archetype is our early nurturing and environmental conditionings, how we come out of that womb and start to be influenced by our parents, by our culture, by any religious, spiritual conditioning, by the economic conditionings of the parents and perhaps extended family. And so in general, this archetype will represent the nurturing parent. And in today's modern world, it's going to be very important that we observe and correlate, because that nurturing parent may be the mother or it may be the father. And it is possible that it can be both parents. And they may be different genders and may be same gender. Here again, observe and correlate. One of the most basics in this early environment is when a parent is physically or emotionally unavailable or absent, it can create unmet emotional needs. Our needs aren't being met when we're a young little soul, and we may not even be able to verbalize what it is that we need. And so, depending on what those conditioning factors are, it is possible it can create some emotional narcissism displacements. It can create bottomless pits of emotional needs. We are going to, in looking at 3 chart examples here, have an example where the father is deceased. We will have an example where the mother was unavailable. And so again, observe and correlate what this is about. This is also the archetype of our self-image, how we build up that sense of ourself that is just always happening on this moment by moment emotional basis as we just filter through all these feelings and emotions we have, and how we react to our environment and how the environment comes at us, and how that then builds who we are as a little individual. And when we're young, we take everything in wholesale. We don't have an objective filter yet. And so these early environments that we come into, we can spend a lifetime observing them, detaching from them, doing all that Uranian, hopefully being able to objectify, and then lead us into a maturation process of our emotions and then our self-image as well. This is the archetype of emotional self-reliance, meaning learning how to internalize security. I rely on myself to meet all my emotional needs, versus looking for emotional security from outside ourselves, from all those external forces and factors in our world, starting with parents and then our perhaps mentors or school teachers, all the way into our adult relationships if we have those unmet emotional needs going on. We can spend a lifetime learning how to be emotionally self-reliant as well. I mean, as long as we have breath, we are going to be emotional beings. And an EA, it is through the senses, through the emotional body, that we really evolve as souls. Now, this archetype, Moon Cancer, fourth house, has two distinct emotional cycles: withdrawal and animation. And with the withdrawal cycle, something triggers us and we go inward. We kind of shut down, we go silent. We sometimes want to just be left alone because there's so much going on in our emotional being that we've got to really work with it within ourselves. And many times we'll have emotions going on that can be from the subconscious realm. It can even be from an unconscious realm when you look at it from the perspective of reincarnation. And so it is healthy for all of us, and even for our own children, to allow them, when they have those little quiet time periods and shut down time periods, to let them do their processing. Again, they may not be able to verbalize it very well. It doesn't mean as a parent that we can't give them a hug, or we can't hold them, or we can't just sit quietly in our space with them. But we have to be able to honor that. And then we can honor that as we move into our adult relationships as well. We all have those time periods where we get moody and we have to go inward to figure something out. And once we do, then the animation cycle gets triggered. And then all of a sudden we want to talk about it. Oh, can I process this with you? And, talk about it 3 times so that we really know we're on the same page about it. And so all of a sudden we want to emote everything. We're active, we're playful, we're, running around and being whoever we want to be in our life, and, just enjoying ourselves or emoting in whatever way. And then sooner or later, withdrawal comes along. And so if we can understand that with this withdrawal animation from the perspective of raising children, if we can understand it from the perspective of relating to a partner, if we can understand it from just our own nature, it can be so helpful for us in being able to recognize emotions, and then why we sometimes feel the way we feel and what we can do about it. That emotional maturation that I talked about. Now, this archetype is also one of the 2 archetypes specifically that deals with our hormonal nature and what we call gender switching. It relates to what we call anima-animus psychological dynamic along with Saturn. In other words, there are natural differences between the law of what it's like to be a male and the law of what it's like to be a female. And we're speaking natural laws here, not all our human-made conditionings telling us this is what this gender should be and that gender should be, etc., etc. We're not going to take the time to delve into this subject right now because we don't quite have the time for it. But from the process of reincarnation, when we are switching back and forth between genders, it can be very uncomfortable the first time or 2 we come in a different gender from the one we've lived the last 5 lives or however many. And so that creates its own source of emotional conditionings, emotional difficulties, and creates this, I don't feel like a little girl. I feel like a little boy. And oh my gosh, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but if we could just understand those hormonal situations from the perspective of reincarnation, we could sure take a lot of politics out of learning how to unconditionally love and accept any soul that comes through and their personal journey and how they want to do it. So again, that natural process of reincarnation allows us to progress, uniting our male and female halves. We go back and forth, male, female, male, female. And as we expand in consciousness, consensus, individuating, spirituating, eventually our soul is wanting to get to that point of what we would call androgyny, being able to have our inner male and our inner female balancing, regardless of what physical gender we're coming through. And so here again, even all of the gender switching and its hormonal situations, that's still that process of emotional maturation that we're all going to go through, that then helps us be these unique, self-oriented, naturally, inwardly secure beings, taking care of ourselves. So again, can we achieve that emotional homeostasis regardless of which gender we are? And so this is a quote that I had on a poster from college. Not the poster in the background, but this is the quote. And I've loved this for a long, long time. And I thought, what a nice transition between female and male, or moon and Cancer. Nothing is as strong as true gentleness, and nothing is as gentle as true strength. So let us take a moment now and look at this archetype of Saturn, Capricorn in the 10th house. This is the passive polarity, cardinal modality, and the earth element, which is dealing with that physical world. So this is the archetype of our physical and age maturation process through all of our outer social, environmental conditionings. Here again, parental, cultural, religious, economic, etc. So in general, this represents the maturing parent, the parent who teaches us how to mature beyond our early nurturing environment. And one more time, we've got to observe and correlate, because in today's world, we can't make any assumptions that this is going to be the father. It may be the mother, and I'll show you an example with this. And again, one more time, we may have situations where parents may be physically and or emotionally absent. And so when we have parents that are just not there, or we have real strict or cruel parents, it can also have a tendency to turn us inward. Passive polarity here, okay? And it leads us into reflecting about ourselves, that self-reflection. And then it creates these lessons of, okay, I got to learn how to somehow take care of myself. And that maturation process in the world is achieving our own sense of authority, which will include right, wrong standards of conduct. Now, I remember reading someone else was going to be speaking somewhat on this subject. So again, I'm not going to go touch into a lot of stuff in detail with these two archetypes. I'm kind of trying to kind of funnel them down to parents and children. So thank you for bearing with me if I'm, not going into detail in certain areas. In general, though, maturation with Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house is recognizing our space, time, form, and circumstances in life, including our related mortality. It's that first Saturn square to itself at about 7 years of age that we start to recognize death and dying in a space-time medium. This is an archetype where we also have to learn self-responsibility for our own actions. In other words, we cannot play the victim. This is where we learn self-discipline and self-determination to achieve our own desires. Now, as we spoke a little bit before, when we sometimes have strict parents and they turn us inward, we can do that when we're young, but we can do it throughout our whole life. That polarity to the moon Cancer fourth house archetype and the animation withdrawal, that also can be a polarity of what helps us go inward to self-reflect. And it can include what EA will call a natural state of depression. It leads us to an inward turning process so that we can become aware of what motivates us. Why am I this way? Why do I act this way? What are the motivations and desires and dynamics that led to this point, and what do I want to do about it? Can I create the energy to take charge of my own life? Can I use this inner reflection to look at how I want to make different efforts in my life? And via natural law, if we want to play victim, which is sometimes too easy to do with all of our patriarchal distortions for a long period of time, we can have a sense of guilt because we're not maturing, because we're not making an effort. We can turn inwardly judgmental of ourselves. We can feel judgments from society if we want to be different from them, because this is the archetype of consensus conformity and consensus judgments or standards of right, wrong conduct. They're necessary in the consensus world because it's how we all live together. There's a reason we have stoplights. It helps prevent accidents. But sometimes, especially via this patriarchal conditioning we are all surrounded by, there is such conformity that we cannot be free. And so one of the most important things we can do with this archetype is to have that maturation process in the world, our own sense of authority, to then figure out how we're going to relate in the world and evolve into our own natural state. And when we do that, we will have our own sense of right, wrong conduct that may actually be different than how we were raised. We break free from the parents. We break free from a religion that we don't agree with. We, break free from social conditioning factors that just don't work for us anymore. This is also the archetype of career and social positions. Most of us, make it out of childhood. We grow up into adults, and yes, we can have adult children running around, but we all, as we move into adulthood, are working to establish again that individuality and authority within a culture or society. We learn how a society works in order to accomplish those goals and desires that we may have. And it can take us all the way into the potential to be a leader. And we can be a leader and serve as a role model in consensus individuating and spirituating states of society. And one more time, this is also the archetype of gender switching. And so from birth and maturing, aging, as we talked about before, we can be maturing, and we can have those puberty hormonal shifts come along. We can have hormonal shifts come along with slow-moving planets aspecting natal Saturn, and all of a sudden we feel like we want to switch genders for some reason. So we can have, even with Saturn, a variety of emotional moods and feelings and emotions. Sometimes they're difficult to relate to. And especially if, again, we don't have acceptance of reincarnation, which is not the majority. With this archetype, though, we sometimes choose to suppress and try and control all those emotions. And if we do, then they tend to come back at us. We project them outwards, and then we wonder why I'm getting all this in my face. And so here again, if we can go over to that polarity and use the withdrawal and animations to start to become aware of those suppressed emotions, we can emotionally mature again, even with this archetype. And so we can become aware of what the emotional triggers are rather than becoming a victim of them. What am I learning about myself? How can I achieve again this anima animus balance within myself, regardless of which gender I am born into? We don't just willy-nilly choose our genders. There are reasons for it from that perspective of reincarnation. Okay, so that is just a little bit of a recap for you. And here again is one more for those of you who may be new to astrology or evolutionary astrology. With this hoe archetype, one of the things that we can always be asking ourselves, how do women balance their inner male? And how do men balance their inner female? Our soul evolution is balancing that anima animus, regardless of our current gender. All right. That is my material for now. And so looks like I'm doing okay. I'm gonna work with 3 chart examples for you, and I'll do my best to spend about 15 minutes on each one. Pause for a drink of water. Are there any questions or anything that I could explain better?
So far, no questions in the chat, but thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so we're going to use 3 charts. They're pretty much same age time frame. They are 12, 13, and almost 14. These are 3 little souls that I know on an intimate basis. It sometimes makes for some of the better observing and correlating. And I never had biological children, although I have raised a stepson. I have been quite active in raising a lot of nieces and nephews. I'm doing a quick head count. 4 nieces and nephews, a few great nieces and nephews, and some close friends that I have known with children. And so I decided I was not going to show you their faces with the world of AI, EI, emotional intelligence, huh? Not that they're not out there on the internet by the parents, okay? But I thought, okay, I'm going to be responsible here. And so the first one that we're going to look at, if you can see my arrow, I'll just stay with the arrow, is our little blonde here. Okay, these 2 are actually second cousins, but they have been raised almost as siblings. They have known each other their whole life. We're going to look first of all at our little blonde that you see on your left-hand screen. The nurturing parent was mom, and she's third individuated. The maturing parent was first of all dad, who was second individuated, a libertarian rebel. But then it passed along to mom because when our female was 10 years old, her father had a stroke and was gone. And it was from a car accident 5 years prior in which he was T-boned, and the carotid artery in the neck built up, and it turned out to be undiagnosed. And so overnight, this little girl lost her father. It just so happened that due to a long distance move, the mom and dad were living with the maternal grandmother and grandfather, and they had set it up to do it for a year. And then the parents were going to move into their own place. Well, the father passed before that could happen. And 4 months after father passed, the maternal grandfather unexpectedly passed from a fall down a flight of stairs. So this little female lost the two males in her life within, again, a few months. And while she was growing up, both parents were school teachers, our school teachers. And so the maternal grandmother and grandfather were the babysitters and absolutely, adored taking care of her. This female is very socially active. She is learning lessons about you can't be friends to everybody. She has a tendency to always want to take care of her friends and make sure that everybody's happy. She is an extreme athlete. She is in competitive cheer, which is a combination of gymnastics and cheerleading. It's very acrobatic stuff that you turn and twirl and get pushed, thrown up in the air and come back down and all that kind of stuff. She started doing that when she was 4 years old, along with several other sports, but that was the one that stuck. She is very emotionally demonstrative, both good and bad. Everything is extremes. And of course, with two parents as school teachers, she does excellent in school. She likes school. So I'm just going to point out, you can see right here on your screen, I went with the moon Saturn. They're in a gibbous opposition to each other, along with the T-square to Mercury, new phase, Pluto, Capricorn, 7th house. We have no planets here in the 4th house. We have 4 planets, Chiron, Neptune, Jupiter, Uranus, in the 10th house. With Cancer, it happens to rule 2 house cusps, the 2nd and the 3rd, with a south node in Cancer. And Capricorn rules the 8th and 9th house cusps, with the north node in Capricorn. And so to help you out, for me, I guess I sometimes tend to go towards starting with 4th house and 10th house cusps when I am looking at a chart. If you look at the fact that we had a Cancer 4th house cusp here, let me make sure. Oops, excuse me. Sorry. Apologies for that. Got to get my houses correct here. 4th house cusp was Leo. The mother went through multiple miscarriages. They had a hard time conceiving, didn't have a child until their mid-30s. And so when this child came along, she was like a miracle baby that she actually made it. She was born through a cesarean, what do they call it? C-section. And so she is just the center of her mom's world. Leo mom's a special ed teacher. And so she just, absolutely doted on this daughter, as well as the 2 grandparents. And so the emotional early environment for this little girl is she was the center of everybody's world. Surprisingly, she has a very sweet nature. Surprisingly, she didn't turn out overly egotistical, which probably could have been a tendency to happen, but it didn't. She is very, again, emotionally demonstrative. I think it comes from the 0 degrees Aries moon, in addition to this Leo on the 4th house cusp. But with that Aries moon, she seems to move through the emotions pretty fast. Now, the father up here on the 10th house cusp, you can see the trauma of the stroke and the death. Another thing that happened with the father is he had an early marriage. And when his son was 2 years old, his son died of bacterial meningitis, infection in the brain. And his son was gone within like 2-3 days. It caused the father to go through a dark period of time, suppressing emotions, Aquarius 10th house traumas, but he managed to come out of it. And the dad was a history teacher. And one of the things that he shares with his daughter is a love of, again, if you can think a libertarian history teacher, second stage individuated, can roll facts out of his head like there's no tomorrow. And so the daughter has turned out somewhat this way as well. And it might be this Mercury new phase to Pluto. She can turn around and tell you, well, guess what? And those were her favorite, that's her favorite phrase. Guess what? Guess what? And she'll launch into telling you some details of something she learned in school 3 months ago. And you're going, oh God, you still remember that? Yes. And so that is it. Father also was almost like a friend. He was very patient with her. Mother could get quite explosive. Mother has a Grand Cross in her chart. Father would then be that Aquarian, just even keeled, detached, neutral for the child. Since father has died, mother now has to take over both the nurturing and the maturing roles. Mother has been active in reaching out to various family members in the extended family that are males and actually asks them, would you handle XYZ with my daughter? So she has a male mentor and a male perspective. It might be the whole school teacher thing, and the intensity of dealing with special ed children day in, day out in today's world. She knows how to reach out for resources. The T-square, you can just see this moon, Saturn, the gibbous opposition. We're going to see repeating elements here, and I'll keep track of time for you. The moon, Saturn opposition, there were time periods where these two parents were diametrically opposed to each other. And at one point, the mother had thought maybe she needed to divorce the father, and they managed to work through it. But this is it. This opposition is in T-square to this Mercury, Pluto, and Pluto in Capricorn. This can be another symbol of literally losing the father figure, the maturing parent in her world, and the crises that came through that. Surprisingly, this child seems to be fairly emotionally resilient. Again, can get emotionally triggered, and here's that South Node in Cancer, and even late Cancer on the 3rd house cusp here can get emotionally triggered, and in the spur of the moment with this moon and Uranus conjunction here, and here's another trauma signature, losing dad, 10th house, just explode and can be very, very loud verbally. Mercury, Pluto, you can hear this kid across the room. But there's it's almost like there isn't emotional suppression, and this little girl will wail it out, and then she just moves on. And And half an hour later, you wouldn't know that anything happened, and she's moving through and processing again. And so, observing this moon in Aries gets to be, pretty interesting. We'll see how she continues to move and evolve through puberty, because she's so athletic. She's been a little late going into her menses and puberty, but she does express interest in boys, so we'll see where she goes with all of that. I suspect with all of these planets in 10th house, and I got to back up, I got to remember something for you. With all three of these charts, it was fairly easy for me to observe the evolutionary state of consciousness for the parents. But with these three chart examples, I went back and forth over it, and I just decided I wasn't going to pigeonhole these little souls, because there's a lot of a Reader's Digest evolution that I like to say that they may go through with consensus individuating, spirituating. I will say with the two female examples, they don't necessarily express anything spiritually on their own. So maybe that may be in that consensus individuating. The male chart example, as we'll see next, maybe he does share some of that stuff, but it also might be some of his parental conditioning factors as well. Having said that, with this 10th house cusp with 4 planets, we saw the trauma of Uranus here, and dad kind of, all of a sudden gone, and the trauma and wounding of that may come with these 2 Aquarian planets. One of the reasons why the mom had thought about maybe divorcing with the dad was for alcohol issues, which you can see right here with the Uranus in Pisces signature. But this little soul, I suspect with these planets in Aquarius conjunct the North Node, she has a very, very strong interest in science. She has a strong interest in animals. She has a crab. She has 2 fish. She had 5 cats. She's down to 3. Animals, always bringing home various little lost things. So we'll see where if she goes into those healing modalities, or if she turns out to be in the STEM world. It might be a little young yet. I suspect maybe we'll just see how she goes through puberty, and whether or not with Jupiter new phase Neptune, if at some point she expresses her own interest spiritually. Let me see. Oh, I made notes on everybody. Again, for the most part, she seems to be pretty socially integrated. Again, emotional extremes, but you can talk to her psychologically. She gets it, she understands it, moves on. And now she's just trying to negotiate that whole world of female friendships as you're moving into puberty. The cheer is a very interesting sport, because you have to have extreme trust of your teammates, because they are constantly having to throw you in the air and catch you. And she's on 2 different cheer teams. She's already in high school competitive cheer as an 8th grader. And then she does private competitive cheer as well. And in one of them, she actually is what they call the flyer, where you're tossed in the air and you have to trust those teammates to catch you. And in the other one, she's the base and she's responsible for catching. And so it does really require the teammates to really build that seventh house Pluto trust with each other. And she, again, even in the cheer, is known as being very competitive, but the mother hen. She will go help out the one who falls. She will stay behind and make sure that her elbows, the other little girl's elbows okay, or whatever it is. All right. Questions before I move on? Hopefully I'm giving you enough descriptions, but also showing where I am finding everything. One final thing, the new moon is balsamic. Mercury, Pluto, moving towards it. Mercury's new phase, Pluto. And so I think what we'll see here is some working together. If she can get past being everything to everybody, that perhaps this North Node Capricorn 8 can really help her with some of her maturing decisions. And this is already coming with parenting from the mother, saying you have to make healthy choices in who you're going to be friends with. And she also is receiving some of that messaging as well from an uncle who is active in her life, and saying, you want to choose friends who can help you evolve and grow and help you be a better person. All right. Questions, comments, anything before I move on?
Looks like nothing at this point.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to a male chart. And again, these three young ones, they're a little easier for chart example because they're not necessarily a 2-year-old that I don't know anything about. I've had the time to have some observation of all three of these, and which is kind of why I chose this age group. In regards for this male, both parents are nurturing and maturing. And hopefully I can be clear enough in showing you some example with this. And just as a little tidbit for you, when the School of EA did a conference in Portland back in 2011, I spoke on this same subject, and this was my example. And this example was a little itty bitty baby at that point, and I had some past life regression work with this little soul. So now I've had, some time to observe, and I actually was camping with this little one last weekend. And so both parents are in that transition between third individuated, first spirituated. Mom is the co-owner of a pretty major company in the medical field with traveling nurses. Dad became the stay-at-home dad, and he's also a musician. They're both liberal. They are spiritually based. They are upper middle class. And this little soul was a surprise. He has 2 older siblings, 24, sister 22, brother. They're already out of the house. This little male came in with anger issues, and the parents and even the older siblings who were, teenagers when this male came in, there was a lot of intense parenting with him. If you've heard of the love and logic method, it's very much a choice method. It's not do as I say. It is, do you want this or do you want that? Okay, you can choose this or that. And it's trying to help them really learn a sense of individuality and feel like they can be in charge of their life in some way. So he was very deeply immersed with this method. And both of the parents I would observe both of them taking turns being that nurturing parent and just sitting with him and talking with him and helping him process through the anger. And even as a little child, why do you feel this way? What do you think's going on in your world that causes this anger or causes your tears or whatever it is? And so they were able to help him really calm down compared to what he was like as an infant and as a 2-year-old and 3-year-old. I mean, to the point that he would bite people, and instead of yeah, 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 they would literally just pick him up and hold him and just gently say, that's not how we treat people. And so it was a whole different perspective of what you might see in the consensus world, and a parent holding off and slapping a kid across the face or putting him in timeout. There was none of that. This is also another very active athlete. He does soccer. Right now, the biggest thing that's going on in his life is working with low self-esteem issues. As you can probably see on your screen with the 6th house. He has a lot of the cup half empty stuff. It's always wrong. It's wrong. I can't get it right. And then he gets frustrated and he doesn't want to do the project anymore. He's a natural little engineer. He can tear anything apart, put it back together. He alternates between homeschooling and public schooling because this family travels a lot. This child has already been on 3-4 continents, and I don't know how many countries he's been in. He just came home from 2 weeks in Morocco before the earthquake. So as we look at then these primary considerations that you see on your screen, we have the moon over here, Aquarius 7th, in a waxing trine to Saturn. In our 4th house cusp, we have Saturn in Libra. We have Venus in Scorpio. Over here in the 10th house, oh, and we have Libra on that 4th house cusp. Up here on the 10th, we have Aries, and we have Eris in the 10th house. I have been including them, although I do not consider myself much of an expert on them. Cancer ascendant with a south node in Cancer 12th. Capricorn descendant. And of course, you see the stellium between 1 and 6 degrees Capricorn in the 6th house. Mars balsamic Pluto, north node new phase Pluto, north node balsamic Mars. And so here again, for me, just my personal preference, this 4th house cusp, as I said for you, I have had the observation of seeing both mom and dad be nurturing parents with this child, and just alternating, taking turns depending upon who's doing what and who's working. And with Venus in this 4th house and in the 4th house in Scorpio, also the ruler of the 4th house, they go psychologically deep with him at any moment. And he responds pretty well. He doesn't get frustrated and go, I don't know what you're talking about. He pretty much can, with all those 6th house planets, he does take it in, and then he'll go off and wander by himself and think about it for a while. And then he will come back and say, okay, can I talk about it again? And so I've seen mom do it, seen dad do it. They have been up here with the 10th house, really working in helping him find his independence, find his ability to be out there in the world and be active in the world. Because his 2 older siblings have left home within the last couple of years, and he's now like an only child almost with older parents, it's like he sometimes acts like that little miniature adult, and he can sometimes with the stellium get quiet. And so mom and dad are almost like proactive in making sure, like we went camping, he had 2 different sets of friends show up over the weekend. So he had somebody to play with, not hanging out with just the adults. They continue with the homeschooling. When they're doing that, anytime they travel, they are deliberately working with how another culture is, how, what would you think of something like this? Oh, one more background, I guess I should say. The mom is a majority Hispanic, so he was raised bilingual. He was taught to speak Spanish as much as English in his world, and they go to Mexico a couple of times a year at least. And so again, this 10th house, there is this continual working with independence for this young soul, because again, there is just an intensity that he seems to be going through at this phase of puberty, we think, that has him just doubting himself, and the resurgence of the anger issues are all that 6th house Virgo cup half empty. I'm not good enough. And so he gets frustrated and he wants to not do this particular project that they've initiated, trying to help him learn something new, trying to help him learn where his own natural talents lie and what he wants to work with. They're also trying to help him work with the whole sense of processing 6th house rather than suppressing, you know, what he's feeling. And when his impatience comes up about, I didn't get it right the first time, this Aries on the 10th house, so I don't want to work with it again. This soul is also, as our previous chart, they're the same year, just 10 months apart, I think it is. The South Node in Cancer as well. What I think happens here is this is part of him going into, let me back up. For those of you who may be new in the world of evolutionary astrology and just starting to learn this, one of our variations with Pluto the soul and the nodal axis, our egoic evolution that the soul comes through, is that when we have the North Node conjunct Pluto, one of the variations is the soul is coming from this area of life, and the soul is meant to intend evolving towards that area. Now, because Mars is balsamic Pluto by 3 degrees, this soul is finishing up lifetimes and lifetimes of having a 6th house Pluto. And so that North Node conjunct this Pluto is requiring the soul to put an intense, concentrated effort into the archetypes of Capricorn, the whole maturation process, and especially the outer maturation process in society, and also put a whole bunch of concentration into the 6th house archetype. This is a Virgo soul, Pluto in the 6th house. And so how to process, how to learn how to move forward with life, one step, one step, one step. And so I think what can happen for this soul here is with this South Node in Cancer, 12th house, it still has its point of activity, and it has this rulership of the Cancer on the ascendant. So Cancer ascendant, this soul is instinctively bringing out of its womb its emotional body and how we deal with that whole animation withdrawal that we talked about earlier. And I think it's also helping this little soul bring out all kinds of buried emotions that have just been there forever and ever and ever. And you can even see the squares to Uranus and Jupiter. And so the trauma that might tend to come and be involved with that, and how, even those get, the T squares that Jupiter Saturn or Jupiter Uranus have with this nodal axis. So I think there's deep buried emotions that just come out in waves and cycles for this little one. And then the two parents will work with this moon here to process, communicate, seventh house, and work with emotional objectivity for this little soul, helping the soul understand it. So then it can get back into its emotional body, but back into its physical body, and really be able to process through life. Again, because of the focus that the two parents were able to put on this child, the mother works from home when she doesn't have to travel for work, or they travel a lot for pleasure and mom works. But so there was that intense home environment where both parents could be there for this little soul. So for the most part, he has good social skills, and he can be emotionally demonstrative, although sometimes, again, he runs more that quiet little side. So deep emotions coming up and out, that are really being processed to help him learn this maturation for his soul and do his healing however he is meant to, and allow him to be comfortable in his own skin. All right, questions on that one? If not, I'll move along for us to our next one.
We do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please explain why Pluto conjunct the North Node new phase is a multiple lifetimes of Pluto in the 6th house and not only a few?
Oh, maybe I misspoke. I'm going to repeat it because I don't know if I misspoke. But the lifetimes of Pluto in the 6th house is coming from Mars. Mars is balsamic Pluto. And in the world of evolutionary astrology, we look at those 8 phases. If you think of the sun, moon, 8 phases, new moon, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, etc., we can compare Mars to Pluto that way as well. And a soul needs to have a minimum of 8 lifetimes with Pluto in a house, and they don't have to be consecutive lifetimes. We can bounce back and forth with lessons. And so when Pluto starts to, if Mars is new phase Pluto by a few degrees, that means the soul is just starting to learn lessons in that Pluto house. When Mars is balsamic Pluto, that means it's finishing up lifetimes of lessons of that Pluto house. Separate variation is that, again, the nodal axis moves clockwise. If you start with Pluto, the North Node is new phase Pluto. Whether the North Node is balsamic or new phase Pluto, when the North Node is conjunct Pluto, the polarity for the soul lessons, the polarity sign house, don't come into being. We stay in that house. So the North Node conjunct Pluto is why he's coming from and staying in those 6th house Capricorn lessons. However, Mars balsamic Pluto is why he's had lifetimes of a 6th house Pluto nature to his soul.
Great,
Hope
thank you
that
so
was
much.
clear.
Very
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
And
Excuse me if I misspoke
he
earlier.
also asks, could you expand please on the moon in Aquarius square the Venus in Scorpio in the 4th house?
Thank you. Good one. Thank you. That was one I didn't quite address for you. remember we talked about the fact that the Venus is a ruler of the Libra fourth house cusp, okay? And it also has a rulership of the Saturn in Libra, all right? However, and the parents, would have a tendency to go psychologically deep with him, okay? But the square to the moon, there are time periods where he will get frustrated with parents and more frustrated with mother than father. If I had to, I'd say maybe mom is a little more maturing parent than father. Father's a fourth house Pluto. So maybe mom is a little more maturing. And so that could be a little bit of that Aquarian rub that might go on. Square this Venus because sometimes he doesn't want to listen to mom. Over the last weekend, I observed them going through mom and this little boy, not a volunteer, going through a long conversation where they were just kind of rubbing each other the wrong way. And mom didn't raise her voice, but she kept saying, let me finish my sentence, please. Let me finish my sentence, please. And so I think there can be a frustration sometimes when mom and dad kind of go to that Libra neutrality, or sometimes go that psychologically deep, and the child just wants to kind of emote and explode, which Aquarius will do sometimes. And so now at this point, when that happens, they will say, would you like to go in the living room? Would you like to go hang out in your hammock? Would you like to go process this? And we can talk about it when you come back and you are ready and you've kind of processed through some of this yourself. So there gets to be some of that emotional frustration that will go on with mother. And sometimes he's just, he again, doesn't want to process. He needs to just go in his little withdrawal container in order to be okay. All right. One more chart example. Hope this is working for everybody. Okay, I got my timing going on here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this little one right here. And she has a mother who's third consensus and was nurturing, and then dad took over. And maturing parent is dad, who is first individuated. Mom is Native American. She is Christian, a little bit religious, but she is a recovering addict. And this has been an issue almost the entire time period for this little soul who has turned 12 years old. They're middle class. When she was 5 years old, the parents divorced, and it took a long time. And dad finally was giving full custody because about 3 years ago, the mom almost OD'd and ended up in a facility. And I don't know how much you know about Native American backgrounds. I live in the Northern Plains. 10% of our state is Native American. Finally, social services literally asked father if he would take full custody, and that was what dad wanted. This little soul has an older brother, a younger brother. They both have different fathers. She has a very sweet nature with emotional mood swings. She is someone who will come up and give everybody a hug hello. She'll give everybody a hug goodbye. One of the biggest things with mom is that she has been conditioned to lie. That is mother's nature. She's also a little bit of a street smart survivalist. She has seen things with her mother that no young child should have to see. She also does competitive cheer. These two are second cousins, as I said before, but they've literally been raised as siblings and best friends. She had a very slow start in school. They were wanting to hold her back, hold her back, hold her back. And she finally made up her mind that, okay, I've got to get the school thing. And now she does just fine in school. So she has caught her grades up, and we don't hear anything about it anymore. In this case, the moon is in a disseminating or waning trine to Saturn in Libra again. We've had 3 charts with Saturn in Libra. Let me get my houses right. In the 4th house, we have Pisces on the 4th house cusp, and we have Uranus in the 4th house. Then we have Virgo up here on the 10th house cusp. There are no planets in the 10th. We have Cancer on the 8th house cusp, and we have Venus in Cancer. We have Capricorn on the 2nd house cusp, and we have Pluto in Capricorn generation, as all 3 of these are as well. Early in the 2nd house, and we have a YT square. So we have, I consider Saturn to be a full opposition to Uranus, and it's pulled in because they both have squares to Pluto the soul. And so I think you can see on this 4th house cusp here, in regards to this little soul, mom would dress her up like a dolly. You name it. I mean, frilly little dresses, her hair and ribbons, and I mean, dressed to the nines, I think they call it. And she would kind of go over the top and just always doing that for her. And we sometimes would go, she's just a little girl. Can she play in the dirt? Which she learned how to do, especially when she was at my house. But I think you can see right here, because the ruler of this 4th house cusp is Neptune, and Chiron's here, and they're in Pisces. You can start to see some of the addiction issues that started to come in the early nurturing environment. And also the fact, and I'm not neglecting the Gemini here, all right, but also the fact that mom, throughout this young soul's childhood, would either lie or just tell stories. And so this was something that was observed and then conditioned for this little young child. Father up here, being Virgo on that 10th house cusp, all right, and you can see Mercury Leo opposing this Neptune Chiron, would then start to be a bit of a stickler and call out the stories and say, I don't think that's really the story. Let's talk about what really did happen. At one point, when mom was having a tough time, and just before we almost lost her, at one point, this young child, let's say she was, I don't remember specifically, but somewhere between 7, 8, 9 years old, coming off of that first Saturn square, just at one point to her dad, just crying her eyes out, said, why can't my mom just stop doing drugs? And so from a very early age, again, she's learned these types of things. And the drug was meth. And so needles, those types of things that the child was exposed to. Not anymore. The mother has managed to be clean now for 2 to 3 years. And interestingly enough, and here might be the moon with the waning trine to Saturn, while we think mom may still have some stories, but the mother and father get along very well. The only thing is mom is still neglectful of her child. She treats her almost like her younger sister rather than a mother who actually parents. And so father has turned into being the nurturing parent. Father and daughter live alone. He is stable. He just bought a house. And so this young girl has, I counted it up in my notes, and I'm aware of 6 different homes that this child has lived in a dozen years. And so now she's full-time with dad, and she's stable, and dad is there day in, day out with nutrition, with hygiene, with schoolwork, with being very successful with work, to give that as an example for her and helping her with that and teaching her that. We can see here that we have the moon conjunct south node and Mars conjunct south node. Now, in evolutionary astrology, the south node is the ego of the past, north node, the ego we're striving to create. When there are planets conjunct the south node, we have 3 distinct possibilities: relive, fruition, mixture of both. Relive, something wasn't addressed from the past lives, and you've got to come in and relive, readdress, do it again. The fruition is possible in prior lives, that something has so much effort, so much prior effort, that it just seems to magically unfold with ease and come forth. Those first 2 possibilities are rare. Most common is the mixture of both. Remember, I said that this child didn't do well in school early on. Dad worked on the road at that time, and mom was stay at home when she first started school, and mom just wouldn't even help her. She didn't know ABC 1, 2, 3 until she literally showed up in kindergarten and 1st grade, and she couldn't read by 3rd grade. And so as the divorce came along and dad finished up his master's and he had the free time, he stopped traveling on the road, all of a sudden it turned around. And when she started making an effort on her own to learn, she got it. She still has just a little bit of issues with math, but she got her reading skills down, and she is so aware of observing people. And this is kind of why I have shared, with a father who, father's in his 30s, so younger father, I just have shared with him. Father actually comes to me for astrology charts, astrology sessions on everybody. And so I have said to father, you must be diligent, that Virgo up here, on how she learns by example, because it's not just what you say, dad. She picks up on the vibrations of everything going on, and she just learns osmosis through people. And so there is a concerted effort by both paternal and maternal grandmothers to was to put her in the competitive cheer because big sissy was doing it, but also to just put her in environments where you were observing children who were I don't want to use the word successful, but they were just raised in more wholesome environments, should I say. And so she's been able to have a real strong observation from that. I'm 5 minutes over with time,
We
so
are, yeah, there is one question,
hmm,
but we do need to wrap up within the
sure.
next few
I
moments.
I was just gonna say I'm done. If I missed something, point it out.
Yeah. The question was more around the Pluto square Uranus, which you had both examples in that generation. Um, whether that is contributive to the anger issues.
Yes. And also contributes to the moodiness issues with this little soul.
Yes.
Um, because this whole T square will, the frustration that comes along, and this contributes to the anger issues as well, because she's not always able to express herself as much as she wants to, and there's emotions going on that she just doesn't quite understand, and the own emotional trauma she came in from the mother figure, and how she can split emotional moods at the snap of a minute. So there's several things going on, even the Venus in Cancer. She has to go off and sit by herself to really deeply process those emotional mood swings. And if I'm around her, I am one of the people who try to help process it and ask what's going on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kim Marie. This has been really rich.
Thank you. My last slide with you, if I may leave it. Our family chain is broken and nothing seems the same. But as God calls us one by one, the chain will link again. Found this on a tree hiking about a decade ago, and it popped into my head, and I said, oh, I got to put this in my slides. So thank you, everyone. I hope this has been very helpful to you, and thank you for allowing me to share my time and thoughts with you.
Wonderful. And thank you again for bringing all your years of experience and expertise to this beautiful topic. We have a brief evening, afternoon. For some of you, I know you're in time zones where it is a very different time, but for us here in Pacific Standard Time, it is an evening break. And then we will resume the last lecture of today with Pluto and the Wounds of Change with Steve Wolfson at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that's in about a half an hour here. Look forward to seeing you all in the room if you're up for that. And thank you, Kim Marie. Such a deep honor to have you with us in this online conference.
Thank you.